Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. Makes me really just want to start out by saying, wow, so many things have changed. We drove in this morning on the other side of campus, which I hadn't done in quite some time. The last several times we've been here, it's been at this building, and we have attended some of the events at the Center for the Arts. So I'm hoping it warms up a little later today. We get an opportunity to walk back on the other side of campus because I saw a lot of new buildings, and maybe even a few that were missing that were here when we were here. Allow me just to start by saying how honored and humbled I am to be standing before you today and being recognized as a distinguished alumni from the Department of Accounting, Finance, and Information Systems. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my story, which by its nature is personal, but you need to know that my journey was influenced by many people and events along the way. On a side note, though, I wanted to say, I was telling Maggie, I started out as an accounting major for my first year. Really liked accounting and enjoyed accounting, but somewhere along the line, someone convinced me to, or maybe suggested I change to finance. And then my first real job of responsibility at the bank, with no experience, I might add, was in 1986 when the bank made the decision to go in-house with our data processing, core software application, and data processing. No problem. So I feel like I've had exposure to all three disciplines that this department covers, and I certainly utilize skills I've learned at each of those in my job today, either looking at financial reports or board reports, or even sitting in meetings trying to decide, which we probably could use your all's help on, quite honestly, what's the next technology we need to be thinking about for our bank. I was also excited to hear when I was here a few weeks ago at the banking event that you have a banking as a minor. And I know those of us bankers in Central and Eastern Kentucky are excited about that, and I'm more excited to learn more about that curriculum in the future. I do want to thank Maggie and the nominating committee for this honor. For you students in the room, I wish I had a silver bullet to offer you. It would help you reach your goals and to have a fulfilling career, but I think the process is imperative and beneficial along the way in order to get your personal growth. I attribute much of my personal success and accomplishments from the education and experiences that I had as a student at Eastern Kentucky University, and as importantly, a family that taught me that personal fulfillment and success really comes from hard work and dedication to whatever you're doing, and if you're patient enough, normally good things will happen. Another thing that I really wish I would have knew earlier in my career that I think would have helped is really trying diligently to master the art of communication. And when I think of communication, a lot of that's really about listening first and really putting more focus on building relationships. Because I think both of those two things are incredibly important, whether in business or in your personal life. Working in various departments throughout the bank, my drive and motivation then was to really to learn as much as I could in the job I was doing. I had a curious mind. I always wanted to know how things worked, why they worked, why we did things a certain way, and really was compelled from the beginning to perform at the highest possible level that I could in whatever job was in front of me. Now, I will admit, early in my career, advancement was probably a little slower than I would like to have been or anticipated, especially at our bank. But back then, I think in community banks it was pretty similar because there wasn't a lot of turnover, certainly in the middle and upper level management positions at the bank. And it was those times I kind of had to heed to what I said just a second ago, and just had to continue learning and just performing at the highest level that I could in that current job. Now, I will say, if you get hooked up with an organization that's growing, as ours did and has, that does help expedite that process, and additional opportunities will typically open up, and you just make sure that you're in line for consideration when those opportunities do present themselves. However, I do realize that sometimes during my career I was in the right place at the right time when certain things happen. But I do like to think that my work ethic, leading by example, and really doing whatever it took and apply myself in the current job I was in was a big part of the advancement in my career. You know, I was in my room in the spring of 1985, and I got a call from Cliff Stilts, who was the then current president and CEO of Montgomery National Bank in Mount Sterling. And he was calling to see, he had asked me, did I have a job lined up after college yet, which unfortunately I didn't. And he offered me a job to come back to Mount Sterling to work. Now what I remember about that call is asking him, well, what is that going to look like? To which he really had no, there was really no commitment. He made no commitments. He said that right up front. There was really no clear career path at that time. The reality was, beginning in June, they were going to be losing some folks either through retirement or leave, and he really just needed help. Now, I had worked at the bank prior to my senior year, sort of like an internship. They didn't call it that back then. Mike, I don't remember what they called it. It was not called an internship. But I did make a little money. Minimum wage was $3.35, and that's what I got paid. But more importantly, I received 3 hours credit towards my finance degree, and really unknown to me at the time, I gained a foot in the door and an eventual opportunity at that bank. Now, I'd applied for jobs in some of the larger cities, Lexington, Louisville, even in Atlanta, thinking I wanted to experience life in a bigger city. So the prospect of going back to Mount Sterling really didn't coincide with my plan, and I wasn't overly excited. And I asked Mr. Stilts, who happened to be, he's also an EKU grad, if I could think about that for a few days. So I called my dad to solicit his advice and see if he had any pearls of wisdom to lay on me. And it was a very short discussion, really, because he asked me what my alternative was and if I had a solid concrete plan to do something else, which I did not. So he highly suggested that I take that job. And I was thinking about that yesterday, and I probably really haven't thanked him enough for those encouraging words. Maggie also asked me to talk a little bit about why I chose to come to EKU. The truth is, Eastern was really the only place I considered. However, my first exposure to campus was in 1979. My best friend at the time back in Mount Sterling's older brother was a student here, an accounting major and now CPA as well. And he invited us to a football game, a playoff game. And what I remember about that specifically, it was in December, it was incredibly cold. But the Colonels won the game in double overtime against Nevada Reno. Mike, you remember that probably. Following that, I had the opportunity to meet a couple of the players who were friends of his, and in particular, why I remember this, I don't know. But I met a guy named Joe Richard. He was the nose tackle. And what struck me about him, outside of his pads, he looked like he was about my size. But he was incredibly gritty, tough, huge personality, and I thought it was pretty cool that he took the time to talk to a high school student from Mount Sterling. Some of you are aware, we went on to win the national championship that year, beating Lehigh 30-7 in the final game. But it was a little more exciting when we repeated that in 1982, being on campus and a student and being participating in the entire season. So I was a sports fan. EKU was a really renowned national power at that time. In between those years, they lost in the final, so we were playing for that championship almost every year. And I remember witnessing the level of enthusiasm, and I don't know if you all still do this today. In the end zone, it was called the Hill. I don't know if you can still sit on the hill to watch games, but I felt like that was something I wanted to be part of. I also played tennis growing up, and a couple summers I took lessons from EKU's tennis coach, who was Tom Higgins at the time, so that put me on campus several times those summers. And I did have this dream that I really thought I was decent. I thought, well, maybe I can play for Eastern someday. But unlike Joe Richard, I was a little late bloomer. Not that I'm a giant today, but I was 5'4" when I graduated from high school. That didn't bode too well for a future tennis career. And really, my dad attended EKU and was a proponent, and it just really felt like the right place for me. I could talk at length about my experiences here. I thoroughly enjoyed college life and being on campus. I lived in Palmer Hall for almost 3 years. I feel like I took advantage of almost all the opportunities and activities on campus, but determined not to go home on the weekend because at that time EKU had a little bit of a kind of known as a suitcase college, and I did not want to go home, so I decided to join a fraternity the second semester, which was a little out of my comfort zone, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I made because it not only facilitated lifelong friendships and experiences through participation in intramurals and Greek life, but really the fraternity thrust me into positions that prepared me for future leadership roles. In addition, my senior year was spent most of the time working on group projects in our upper level finance classes, which really taught me the importance of patience and collaboration, which is really one of my favorite topics. And as you heard, some of the things I do in our community, when you get involved in community service, collaboration is incredibly important because everybody has a different idea and you have to be really patient with that. I know they already introduced Mary, but it's part of my comments and I don't want to get out of sequence. So when I think about the decision of coming to EKU and the decisions I made while I was here, the best decision I ever made was in the fall of 1983 when I said yes to a friend of mine who called and said, would you be interested in going to a sorority dance on a blind date with Mary Weigel? Now what you need to know about Mary is she had a twin sister. And I remember passing them on occasion, really over by the Combs building as I recall. And the only difference in them was one had kind of straight hair, which ended up being Molly, and the other one had this real impressive perm, which was Mary. So when my friend called, I said, well, which one is she? Is she the one with the straight hair or curly hair? So she's obviously with me here today. You heard Mary's a graduate of 1984 with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. And we've now been married for 32 years. And I owe her a ton of gratitude for the support she's provided me in my career and to our family and as you heard, our 3 adult children now. So Maggie also wanted me to talk a little bit about my career path, which I can do in a minute. I'm really more comfortable talking about our bank. And I want to share some information about that, especially the way we have non-traditional, no pun intended as our name is Traditional Bank, how we've grown our bank to become the 6th largest community bank in the state of Kentucky, domiciled in the state of Kentucky, and why I feel that our culture is the primary driver of that growth and has significantly impacted my career. Now, our success is not rocket science. It's really executing on a very simple philosophy, believing that people make the difference, living the golden rule, and pulling on the rope in the same direction, which implies for us the team approach and having everyone on the same page regarding our strategic direction. Again, it speaks to a little bit about collaboration. We pretty much take the team approach at our bank in almost everything we do. When Mr. Stilts retired from the bank, we asked him to write down in his words, because he's the grandfather of our culture and philosophy of our bank and how it still impacts us today. So if you can indulge me just for a second, I really want to read what he wrote. He said, over the years, Traditional Bank has enjoyed a significant success nurturing a simple corporate culture with people being the main focus. Since change is constant over time, the culture has been tested, monitored, and tweaked, so it remains appropriate to our business philosophy and therefore stays healthy and positive. In general, our philosophy has been to encourage people to do the following things: work hard, take pride in what you do and do it right, play hard, enjoy life, and laugh whenever you can, treat people fairly, treat everyone with respect, and never take advantage of anyone, support and be active in the communities we serve. We all win when that happens. And finally, do what's right, even when no one's watching. If these traits become established, then mutual support and trust will follow throughout the company. Once good people and positive cultures in place, the organization is in a position to accomplish great things. Believing that people make the difference, and we say that every day in our organization. The best people win. We constantly work hard to recruit the best people for our organization. Once we succeed in recruiting quality people, they are treated fairly, honestly, and given opportunities to commensurate with their talent. All staff members have the opportunity to grow through formal and informal training, as well as through ongoing mentorship by their supervisors. We also strive to put people in positions where their strength can be fully utilized and their weaknesses minimized. We just refer to that as getting people in the right seat on the bus. Over the years, we have somehow gathered a group of people who have diverse backgrounds and a strong entrepreneurial spirit, yet they can work together as a team while placing egos to the side. In its simplest form, it's honestly about treating people fair, and for us that applies not just to our customers, but equally to our employees, and doing what's right. And I would refer to those as two things in our bank that are really non-negotiable. So a brief history about our bank. It started in 1902. The current ownership of the bank bought the bank in 1978, and at that time the bank was $14 million in assets. After 74 years, only $14 million in assets. I started in 1984 part-time. The bank was $36 million in assets at that time. 2 locations in Mount Sterling and 25 employees. I talked about organic growth, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I've said we've grown our bank organically. That's 100% true. Since 1988, we did have a merger with a local bank in 1988 in Mount Sterling, but after that merger, the bank was just barely $100 million in assets. 5 locations, all still in Mount Sterling, and about 50 employees. And that was a really big test of our culture because the two banks' philosophies were extremely different. Not only from a business perspective, but how they treated their employees. In 1996, we chartered a new bank in Lexington. There were limited growth opportunities in Mount Sterling. We already had in excess of 50% of the market share there. Now, at the time, Maggie, you remember this, you could not branch across county lines if you were a state chartered bank in Kentucky. That was an FDIC rule. If you were chartered in the state, you were not allowed to cross county lines unless you closed your trailing branch. This was a huge disadvantage for Kentucky banks because at that time you started having the larger banks moving into our state. The Bank Ones, the Fifth Thirds, the PNCs, they could go anywhere they wanted. And we were restricted to the counties that we were domiciled in. And what that required us to do was, though, we had to raise $5 million in capital to start that new bank. The only significance of that number is today the FDIC requires almost $30 million if you would like to apply for a new bank charter. From Lexington, we then branched into Winchester and Paris in the late 90s, opened additional branches in Lexington in 2000, and right at a year ago in 2018, we opened our first office in Frankfurt. And with the exception of that Frankfurt office, before we would expand into any new market, we would try to find a banker in that market, or we might have one on our staff from that market, and we would have them come to Mount Sterling and work for a couple years, really to indoctrinate them into our culture. So again, in 1988, after that merger, we were about $117 million in assets. From 1989 to 2000, the bank grew to $392 million in assets. From 2001 to 2008, our assets grew $608 million, and at the end of 2010, we eclipsed $1 billion. And when you're in a community bank, once you eclipse $1 billion, the rules change significantly on a lot of things you have to do, especially from the regulator's perspective and from a reporting perspective. I won't mention like 2008 to 2010. Most of y'all probably heard what happened during that time frame. Although we did still grow our bank marginally, and very proud of our bank that we were still hiring people, we were still making loans. We did not reduce any benefits for our employees, and there were very few banks in the country who could say that at that time. And then from the end of 2014 to today, in really less than 5 years, we've grown our bank an additional $520 million in assets. So today we're in 6 counties, 16 locations. We're actually now at $1.7 billion and have 250 employees. And it's just really unusual in our industry to grow a bank organically like that. Today, most banks do that through merger and acquisition. Our goal is to grow our bank between 5 and 8% per year, which really maybe doesn't sound like much of a stretch, but if you do the math, that's almost $100 million in asset growth a year, which is can be challenging, especially when you're in more rural markets outside of Lexington. There's no doubt that growth and commitment to our culture has contributed significantly to the success, not only of my career, but the bank. And, that growth gave me opportunities, probably unique back in the time. I didn't appreciate that probably when I was doing it. But I got to work in almost every department in the bank. Prior to becoming president of the bank, my entire career for 30 years was in operations. I told you I worked there in the summer of '84. What I didn't tell you was for the first half of the day, I counted a coin from the Mountain Parkway. It was still a toll road, and for some reason the bank had won the bid to count this coin, which I don't understand today. It could not have been a profitable venture. But I did that half the day, and then after lunch, I went down to the main office, and it was a teller the rest of the day. And I told you about it in 1985 when I got the call to come back to work. They called me a management trainee. It was not that at all. There was no formal program. The reality is they just put me in wherever they needed help. So I spent a lot of time in the bookkeeping department, a lot of time as a teller, worked a little bit in loan operations. But as I think back, it's invaluable experience that most people don't get today because you just can't afford to let people go through. And I did that for 2 or 3 years. In 1986, though, my short IT career was launched. The bank had made the decision to bring their data, we called it data processing back then, came in-house with their first computer system and software application, banking software. So I spent, because I only had a couple back when I was in school, there were only a couple IT classes. And Mike and I were talking today, we had to go to the only computer was in the library. We'd use these punch cards to try to do programming. But I spent 6 months reading IBM technical manuals, and then went to Florida where our software was for 2 weeks, and prior to going through that conversion. Now, what I can tell you about that is, and it won't be news to you all, but the phone you have in your pocket has significantly more storage, memory, disk space we called it back then, and computing power than this first computer we had. It was about the size of this side of that table. And for $100 million bank back then, it took 6 hours to run the nightly update. Over half of that, though, was just doing the backups, which were on these huge 8-inch floppy disks that you loaded into this magazine. And I was living in Lexington at the time, and Mary could tell you how many times I got called at midnight having to go back to Mount Sterling because those floppy disks were easily damaged. The merger of 1998 was the first time I got promoted to a supervisor position. I was over the bookkeeping department and still had some IT responsibilities. But that really got convoluted. What I didn't tell you about that merger, which probably wouldn't happen today is the only way they agreed to merge the two banks is that no employee lost their job and no board member lost their seat. Well, we had to order more chairs for the boardroom because it had 26 people. I don't know if you can imagine being on a committee with 26 people. That was quite a challenge. But we had two of everything. 2 cashiers, 2 head tellers, 2 auditors. My path got really cloudy. And I wasn't so sure that this is where I wanted to be, and actually had started looking outside the bank for potentially other jobs. But in 1992, things changed drastically. They had an early retirement offering. There were 23 people eligible and 22 took it. One happened to be my direct supervisor, so things became a little brighter. I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer in 1999, and that's when I joined the management team. I was elected to the board in 2011, and then following a succession plan that was really developed back in 2006, I became president of the bank in January of 2015. So I spent the first 30 years of my career at the bank, started in the basement, moved upstairs to the top floor, and it was involved primarily in back office operations and branch administration. And when I started my banking career, most president and CEOs' path were promoted up almost exclusively from the commercial lending side, or certainly the finance side of the bank. My kind of claim to fame, I think, is I've never made a loan other than to my children. And like Norman Vincent Peale said, I think I took the road less traveled. I'll just close by saying it's challenging and somewhat uncomfortable to speak on one's own behalf and life story, but I hope it's been a source of encouragement and maybe you heard a few pearls of wisdom along the way. I emphasized it at the beginning that no person's journey is a solo endeavor, and one's own accomplishments are usually a reflection of strong and capable people that you're surrounded by. I had several impactful mentors starting at home, during my time at Eastern, and at Traditional Bank that have greatly influenced my path. So be aware of your relationships, make them authentic, pay forward opportunities that come your way, and be grateful. Thank you.